Hello and welcome to Evaluate This. I'm Andrew Fryer, and in this short screencast I'm going to show you collapsed clusters in Windows Server 2012. In order to explain what that is, the simplest way is to build one. To do that, I've got a number of servers here, 3 physical laptops, London 1, 2 and 3, and 2 virtual machines. A domain controller, which all of the physical machines belong to, and my long-suffering SQL Server environment, London SQL. The first thing I need to do is to actually build a cluster, and I'm going to use London 1 and London 2 for that, where London 3 is my iSCSI target. I'm going to use PowerShell, and here's my script. All this is going to do is to add the Windows failover clustering features into both London 1 and London 2, and then build a simple cluster with no storage. That's my cluster completed. And if I jump onto one of the nodes, London 2, I'll now be able to go and look at that cluster because I also installed the tools. And there is my HA cluster that I just created with 2 nodes in it, London 1, London 2. As yet, no storage. I'm going to add the disks in now. I've got 2 disks here. I'll just rename this to Quorum so I know what it is. And I'm also just going to set the Quorum settings for this cluster. I'm going to use a disk witness, and I'm going to use that disk. And that isn't too dissimilar to what we used to do in Windows Server 2008, 2008 R2, etc. But now what I'm going to do is to create a scale-out file server inside this cluster. So I need to add this disk into cluster shared volumes because I want to use it to host my virtual machines. And now I'm ready to create a role of type file server for my application data, which could be for SQL Server databases or for Hyper-V virtual machines. I'll give it a name, HA file server. And that's what we'll see as the file server when we look for shares. That's done. I need to leave it for a few seconds because if I try and create a file share on it straight away, I'll get a warning message like this. And while I'm waiting for that, I'm going to jump onto London SQL and start to thrash this virtual machine by executing a complicated query again and again. So that's whirring away. And at the moment, that virtual machine, London SQL, is running locally on London 2 on directly attached storage, as you can see here. Now I go back to London 2 and try and recreate my share. What I want is an SMB share for applications. It's asking me where I want to put the share, and it's on my 150 gig iSCSI target that I've already brought into my cluster. I'll give it a name. I'll just call it library. You'll notice that all these options are grayed out except encrypt data access, but enable continuous availability is checked by virtue of the choices I made earlier. What I need to do now is customize my permissions. I'm just going to add a new principal in, which is an arbitrary group I've created of all my physical hosts, namely London 1, 2 and 3. And I'm going to give that full control on this machine so that the hosts have access to this file share to place virtual machines on it. OK. Next. And that's created that file share, which I can now browse to there. And indeed, I can quickly create a folder on it. I'll just call this folder London SQL. You'll see why in a minute. And at the moment, there's nothing in it. Now what I want to do is to take my London SQL virtual machine and move its storage into that file share. So I want to move the virtual machine storage, move all of it into that London SQL folder I just created. Click Finish. That's 14 gigs. It's going to take a few minutes. And while that's cooking away, I'll just minimize this. So you get some idea of what's going on here. I've speeded up this portion of the video as this takes about 4 or 5 minutes to run, and it's only so exciting watching SQL Server executing again and again. Okay, and that virtual machine has now moved across successfully. Having done that, what I can now do is add in another role into this cluster. I'm going to add in a virtual machine. Specifically, my poor London SQL Server virtual machine that I've just storage migrated onto that file share. And notice that virtual machine is still running. And now what I can do is I can move the file share to another node. And you can see how fast that is. Note the virtual machine is still running. And I can also move the virtual machine itself, live migration. And that will tick away, and again, the virtual machine is still running, which is what live migration is all about anyway. And this is what I mean by a collapsed cluster. My two laptops here, London 1 and London 2, have got both of these roles on here. But London SQL is obviously dependent on the file share role. And why this matters is because there's new hardware coming to market now where you have something called cluster in a box. Say 2 servers with serially attached storage connected to both of them with redundant controllers and network cards and so on. And this is how you might set Windows Server 2012 to use that. So if you want to try this yourself, you could go out and get yourself a cluster in a box or rig together a few laptops as I've done in this demonstration. Either way, you'll need an evaluation copy of Windows Server 2012. I've been Andrew Fryer. Thank you very much for listening.